Welcome everyone, Costini here with a discussion about Shadows of Change for Total War Warhammer 3 and my biggest concern with the DLC based on the information we have available. Here I am in Realms of Chaos with the campaign as Boris Ursus. Now, here's the thing that we've seen about Shadows of Change. They've talked about the Changeling, though there's also information about Yuan Bo and some information about Kislev. Now, based on information that is publicly available at this time, here's what I think Creative Assembly is doing and what they've pretty much confirmed that they're going to be doing, at least for the Changeling. For the Changeling, they're going to make a unique campaign in the sense that he's not going to be dealing with territory in the same way Kairos Fateweaver has to deal with. So, in the idea of holding territory, taking and holding territory across the world, that's not something the Changeling is going to do. Instead, the Changeling is going to be infiltrating settlements, basically creating Skaven undercities, and spreading his influence through that. And based on that, I have to imagine that he is going to be a horde army of some kind of description, though the exact specifics of that are unclear at this particular time. Now, here's my issue with that, and it does tie to the price somewhat, which is the biggest controversy surrounding this DLC. So, Creative Assembly is releasing the most expensive DLC in the history of the game, relative to what they're offering. A race pack like the Chaos Dwarves being 25 euros is one thing. A Lord pack as Shadows of Change being the exact same price is, quite frankly, ridiculous as I see it. I am not necessarily surprised. I think that what Creative Assembly has decided to do, or Sega has decided to do, is like, well, they weren't happy about having to rush Immortal Empires. You got to think about the fact that Immortal Empires, for them to release it when they did, cost them a significant amount of money, time, resources to develop. So they weren't able to release as many DLCs, and certainly completely threw their plan out the window, the one they had pre-launch. You look back at Warhammer 2 and how they handled Mortal Empires. Mortal Empires did take a while to come out, whereas with Realms of Chaos, the game basically died before Immortal Empires came out. It is, I also feel, ridiculous, the fact that it seems we are going to get continued support for Realms of Chaos, which, to be quite honest about it, is not really a fun campaign to play in a very substantial number of ways. It does have quite a lot of major issues, as I personally do see it at the moment. And I don't think that anything that they do would fix those problems. But here's my issue. It seems that instead of fixing the races, and I'm not saying that they won't necessarily, but based on what I'm reading, my concern is that instead of fixing the fundamental problems of the races, the issues that Siege has, the issues that Kislev has, the issues that even Cathay has, they're instead making these unique campaigns, and they're probably trying to do that. They're going to do that in making those unique campaigns to tell people, hey, look, buy this DLC. You'll get this very great and wonderful and unique experience that you don't have in any other campaign, and that's the reason this DLC is worth purchasing. That's how I'm looking at it. That's how they're probably going to try and justify the price increase to the DLC compared to other Lord packs we've had before. Because this is double the price of previous Lord packs, and even compared to the Champions of Chaos, which, by the way, had a complete race rework, and for Legendary Lords, compared to the Champions of Chaos, well, 5 if you count Be'lakor, because he likely was developed for that DLC. If you're looking at Champions of Chaos, it was cheaper, what, $10, 10 euros cheaper than this DLC, and added more content. Sure, the campaigns weren't as unique as they're going to do over here with Shadows of Change, be it the Changeling, Kislev, or Grand Cathay, but there were at least more lords. Now, having a larger number of lords is not necessarily the be-all and end-all. I know a lot of people were annoyed about how many legendary lords there were in the Chaos Dwarves. I think the Chaos Dwarves is a really good piece of content, but having a large number of lords just to tick a box there is not necessarily the be-all and end-all. Having unique campaigns is certainly more valuable from my perspective, but not at this kind of price increase that we've seen with Shadows of Change. And the question I have, and the major issue I have, the big concern is like, what does this mean for Kairos Fateweaver? What does this mean for Kislev? What does this mean for Cathay? Is it going to be a situation similar to what we've seen already with the Lizardmen, with Axolotl specifically? Because you look at the Lizardmen, I'm not necessarily going to expect the kind of race change that we got with Grom the Punch, for instance. More so, I expect something like Elfarian or Axolotl specifically, where the baseline race will stay largely the same or exactly the same. You look at some regiments or announcing units, lords, heroes, all that, but the baseline race will stay the same for the other legendary lords. The campaigns will not be fundamentally changed, but instead you get this very unique campaign. But you look at Axolotl, he leaves every Lizardman legendary lord in the dust. His campaign is far better, far more interesting, far more unique than all the other Lizardman campaigns. And the problem with that, with the Lizardmen, is that the Lizardmen are a race that certainly does need improvement. It's not like those issues that the Lizardmen do have go away for Axolotl. He still has them, but he has enough power and enough unique mechanics that he overcomes those issues and becomes one of the best legendary lords in the game. And that's what I'm concerned about, because unless they implement major fixes, at least for Tzeentch and Kislev, the reality of the situation is, why would you want to play a campaign as Kislev going forward as anything other than the Hag? That is really going to be the major concern with this DLC, because it does feel that they're going to leave the other legendary lords dead in the water, so to speak, compared to that. Like the supporter system, like if you still have to deal with the supporter system in the exact same way as Catray, Kursaltan, or even Boris Ursus, if you still have to deal with the devotion system and other issues, then that really means that there won't really be that many reasons to play as Catray or Kursaltan at the very least. Boris Ursus you can always make work, but even he has his own major limitations in terms of economic output, in terms of what he can accomplish on the campaign map. Something that is felt in both Realms of Chaos and Immortal Empire. So his campaign in Immortal Empires can be a lot of fun, because you can actually end up dominating that campaign, as opposed to, well, the awful situation he has to tackle in Realms of Chaos. It just doesn't really work that well. So that is my concern. That's what I'm afraid of. That's what I expect. The only race that it seems like where they're going to actually just improve the race as opposed to just adding unique campaign mechanics, that's going to be with Yambo and with Grand Cathay. But even then, maybe not so much. I mean, Yambo's campaign probably is going to be the one campaign that's going to be closest to quote-unquote vanilla, if you will. But Yambo's campaign, which is going to start over here in start in Wei Lang, which is what they've called it. His campaign is going to. His campaign might be the most similar to what we've already seen from Grand Cathay, but even for him, it is quite very likely that what we end up having is a campaign that just makes the other two irrelevant. And that is my issue. Like, they're trying to sell a great deal of quote-unquote value for the campaign, for this DLC, to justify the cost, but they're likely going to flat out ignore improving the other legendary lords in the way that they should be improved. And that is my major concern with this DLC. Based on information we have, like you look at Astankia and the information we have, and granted, we don't have a lot of information about Kislev in particular, but you look at what they've said so far, and you look at how the Changeling is going to play, and that is how I see this unfolding, which is a problem. Like, it's one thing to have a campaign like Elfarian, because the High Elves are still a really good race, but it's another thing to have another campaign like Axolotl, and Kislev and Siege are far worse than the baseline Lizardmen. I mean, the Lizardmen are decent, they're just slow. Kislev is just bad, flat out bad, and so is Siege pretty terrible to play. Like, what would be the reason to ever play a Kairos Fate Weaver campaign after this DLC comes out? Because you're gonna get better mechanics, more power, most likely, with playing the Changeling, same with playing Mother Estankia as Kislev, same with playing Yambo as Grand Cathay. And while it has certainly been the case in the past where you have a DLC Legendary Lord coming out for a race that does make the others irrelevant, at least for a time, you consider like the Prophet and the Warlock. Ike Claw, while he certainly is really powerful, he didn't just make the others irrelevant. In fact, while at this point the best legendary lords are obviously the paid ones, like Clan Eshin, for instance, is the best DLC legendary lord, you can play quite well with Clan Moors, and it isn't a terrible situation to play a campaign as Clan Moors or Clan Pestilent, or even Clan Rectus if you want to endure Tretch's campaign. I mean, Tretch, the Skaven at least are a decent race. So it's fine to make unique campaigns if the baseline race is good, but it's not quite okay to do so when the baseline race is bad. I've talked about the issues Siege, Cathay, Kislev do have. I'm not going to repeat myself, but poor economy, casualty replenishment for Grand Cathay and Siege, issues with the unit roster, issues with the campaign mechanics, issues with the terrain. Now, I am hopeful that with this DLC, at least for Kislev, that we do get some genuine terrain improvements, especially in Immortal Empires, because Kislev does absolutely need those. And if we get that, genuine improvements to the terrain, it is quite possible that Kislev's campaign is going to be better in Immortal Empires. Like, I can't see them adding another legendary lord to Kislev without changing the terrain, and that legendary lord, Mother Estankia, is going to be in Kislev, though she might end up being a Horde army herself. Yeah, I mean, I'm not against having Horde armies or Horde legendary lords. I think that's okay. I think it can work depending on how they do them, but if she ends up also being a Horde army, then it stands to reason to expect that they're not necessarily going to add the improvements to Kislev as a baseline race that we do need. That's all I had to say. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more. And yes, this DLC is overpriced, and no, it's not justifiable.